Hi, welcome back to the series I'm doing called Maladaptive Daydreaming, and this is where I'm going to be talking about different things related to maladaptive daydreaming. So I already have a few videos up in this series if you want to check those out as well, and this one I'm going to be talking about something very specific, and I always felt obviously this was very specific to myself, but I wanted to put this out there. My aim for this series was kind of to talk about different aspects that might not be so commonly talked about, where people might be like, oh wow, like I did this as well and didn't know. So this is something where I'm hoping that will be the case, because I've seen a couple of other people have said things like this, but I thought this was like so specifically my thing. And this is basically to do with cameras, or to do with like being watched in maladaptive daydreaming. So literally from the beginning, when I was maladaptive daydreaming as like a young person, as a teenager in my bedroom, one of the first things I remember, one of the first scenarios that I played out endlessly was about being watched by people. And I was like at school, with my friends, but I was like being watched by other people. And the watching aspect of it was very important to it. It was like that was almost in my mind, I was like the watcher and the watched, or I couldn't just be doing this scenario without being watched. That was part of it. If I find these things hard to explain, it's because I think they are actually hard to explain. Like, obviously maladaptive daydreaming is hard to explain, and some of the things that you're doing, because you kind of realise, you kind of needed to be a sort of split personality in order to create this full scene that you were trying to make, or what was it I was trying to do, and like why. And I find this really interesting, and I suppose obviously people say about maladaptive daydreaming, like it is like filling needs that we want met, or like, a lot of the times it's, it's giving us things that we want. Like, do we want to be seen? Do we want recognition? Do we want, I suppose it's like deep down, you want to feel loved, and like maybe like being watched is kind of part of that. So I've just found this really interesting, like, over time, thinking about this theme that's always been in my maladaptive daydreaming. So it kind of started with being watched like that, and then one of the big themes was like being recorded on hidden cameras. And I really don't know why, but like I would play out scenarios that I knew were being recorded on a hidden camera, and then I also sort of had to be like the watcher of that, or I had to sort of picture this being watched. And it was kind of like a twofold thing, where I was, inhabiting the people being captured on the camera, but also the people, I guess, watching this. And there was like some kind of satisfaction there. And I'm just talking about, like, there was just like conversations or things happening. And, a lot of the times, like, my maladaptive daydream would involve like famous people, so it would be like a hidden camera was like backstage, and different things like that. And I actually had a bit of like an obsession with hidden cameras in my real life, because I worried about them a lot. And it is interesting how I wonder, how those things played into each other, because I used to, I didn't want to maladaptive daydreaming openly because I was concerned about hidden cameras, and then like hidden cameras kind of played a role in my maladaptive daydreaming, which I suppose was quite interesting. So yeah, when I like went to university and I left my like family home for the first time, I really badly wanted to maladaptive daydream the way I had been when I was at home, which involves kind of a lot of pacing and gesturing and all this kind of stuff. But I really just felt I couldn't, because I was afraid of hidden cameras, and I was afraid of being watched. I was afraid of being caught. And then, it is just funny how like this was all actually incorporated into my maladaptive daydreaming, in the sense I was always thinking about cameras. I was always thinking about people being watched. I was quite obsessed with like, paparazzi and being famous and being watched. And, I think fame and all this is a kind of common theme of maladaptive daydreaming, or I suppose like being popular, and certain things I've noticed are themes. And I read somewhere as well, somebody like maladaptive daydreamed that they were like directing scenes, and I thought that was really interesting. So I guess, I just wanted to put this video up more so that if anybody relates to this, I would love to hear from them, or if you have something strange and specific that you think is going on in your daydream that maybe other people don't have, then, you know, please do let me know as well. I think that'd be interesting. But this was like one of the central themes that I've kind of noticed over the years in my maladaptive daydreaming, which also, you know, was something that I feared in real life. And I think, you know, that combination is really fascinating now that I can kind of look back and think about, you know, why was that so important to me? Like, I think it's, you know, something to do with like importance and feeling important. And I think, you know, a common thing for people in maladaptive daydreaming as well is like to take on, you know, media. Like, you might just literally watch something like a TV show or a movie, and then you can suddenly picture yourself in it, or you will then play out the scenes again, and like you will create those scenarios and you're in it. And that was something really common for me. Like, I would watch things and then I would be that person in it, or like, you know, I would be the actress in it, I would be that character. Like, it was very easy for me to just be like influenced immediately by what I was seeing on screen. So like all of this has like played such a massive part in my maladaptive daydreaming. And I think, you know, it's possible, like cameras kind of signify this feeling of being watched or being judged, or being self-conscious, being on display. And, you know, I think these kind of things are a strong theme for people who maladaptive daydreaming who have anxiety, because you are constantly thinking about what, you know, other people think of you. And I think, you know, if that seeps into your maladaptive daydreaming, then I guess it makes sense, you know, that cameras will show up there. I think, you know, it was just interesting for me is that cameras would also show up there, you know, if I was maladaptive daydreaming in different characters. It's almost like a lot of the times I couldn't just exist as those characters. Like, that would need to be being captured and being watched, and I would also need to somehow be processing that being watched. And I think that probably relates a lot to like how, you know, disassociated people feel, in this sense of like observing the self or observing what's going on, and, you know, being, you know, I think I've always thought about maladaptive daydreaming as like feeling very split in two as a person anyway, because you're not living that life that looks like you're living kind of on top of that in another life. And then, you know, you add on to that this feeling of the camera and of being watched, and you're almost like splitting yourself three ways. And you can kind of understand, I think, you know, when you think about that, you know, you can really understand why it does cause a lot of stress and suffering. You know, if you say to somebody you're suffering because you're daydreaming too much, it doesn't quite capture, of course it doesn't capture at all, because people wouldn't understand that, but, you know, it doesn't capture this, you know, sense of being split. But I think actually if you think about it in this way of being the character doing something, and then also, you know, having to somehow understand that that character is being watched, and that person watching has an opinion, and all this is going on in your mind, like while you're walking down a street, or like while you're, you know, trying to do your work. And I think that actually, you know, when I'm thinking about this camera idea and this idea of being watched, I actually think that shows a lot, you know, how tormenting this problem can be, and how, you know, the word daydreaming just doesn't encapsulate like how damaging this feels inside your brain, and how, you know, stressful it is. And I think as well, you know, this sense of being caught on hidden camera that I always had, you know, is very much related to the shame that exists around maladaptive daydreaming, that I think, you know, a lot of people experience. And if you have certain shame, or, you know, you're worried, it's always like a massive secret, maladaptive daydreaming. And I think that would also explain, you know, why cameras can be such an important theme in this. So I think, you know, cameras, although I think it was very specific to me, I can understand like why it would maybe be like quite a broad motif in maladaptive daydreaming for people, because, you know, it almost encapsulates this feeling of being watched, of secrecy, of shame, of being on display, of wanting to be on display in a certain sense, of, you know, wanting attention, of wanting approval, like all these things the camera kind of represents. So in that respect, I think it actually does make a lot of sense. But it's quite, you know, it's a very complex thing, it's a very complex feeling. And when I'm thinking, you know, back to how intense my maladaptive daydreaming was, and this balance of like the camera and the, you know, the subject and the watchers, and, you know, what I was trying to capture there, you know, it just does, you know, it does feel very painful and feel like a lot. And I always described my maladaptive daydreaming as kind of, when it got intense like that, like it would just literally make me literally nauseous, you know. I just felt sick, it felt too much, it felt like I was making myself ill, I felt like I was going crazy. And, you know, as I'm describing it now, it almost makes sense that it would feel that way, because, you know, I had this concept of the hidden camera and of being watched, and, you know, all this stuff that was going on in my mind. And, you know, it was just so difficult to deal with. And I think, you know, one way you can kind of help this is to think about, you know, who is watching, who is represented as the watcher, and are these the people that you want to impress in real life? Or is this, you know, why is it that they are the watchers of what's happening? You know, I think if I could have gone back in time and sort of untangled all this, I think that would have helped a lot. Like I'm really only starting to piece all this together and starting to see the patterns, like, because I am like being treated and starting to recover, or at least, you know, I'm in this period where, you know, I can kind of look back and analyse what I've been doing all these years. So yeah, I think if, you know, you can write this down and start thinking about, you know, what it is you're getting from this feeling of being watched, or, you know, this need to have the camera present, you know, I think it would give like a lot of answers and be really interesting to know like how often that comes up in your daydreams. But yeah, again, like this might be something that not a lot of people relate to. I am quite curious, you know, how many people do relate to this. So if you do relate, please do leave a comment and let us know. Please do like and subscribe if you can. I've just also put up a video about a free workbook for maladaptive daydreaming. If you want to grab that, that's on another video, and there's a link down below as well. Yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.